In November 1956, Britain launched a military invasion of Egypt. It had the ships, it had the soldiers, it had the air power. It was winning. 48 hours later, it stopped, not because it lost a battle, but because of a single financial threat from the United States. That is not a metaphor. It is a documented historical fact, recorded in cabinet minutes that are now public record. The mechanism behind that moment, the precise invisible chain that turned military power into financial helplessness, is still running today, and it governs your money right now.
Think of a reserve currency like the chips at a casino. Inside the casino, everyone uses chips, not their own national currency. The casino decides how many chips exist, what they're worth, and who can cash them in. If you want to play, you need chips. The country that issues the world's reserve currency is the casino. Everyone else is a player. For most of the 19th and early 20th centuries, that casino was Britain. Its currency, the British pound sterling, was the chip that powered global trade. If you were a merchant in India, a banker in Argentina, or a government in West Africa, you held pounds. Not because you loved Britain, because that was how the world worked.
Then came the Second World War. The Second World War lasted from 1939 to 1945 and involved most of the world's nations. Britain fought from the first day to the last, and it nearly bankrupted itself doing so. By the time the war ended, Britain owed billions of dollars to the United States. Its gold reserves, the physical gold stored in vaults that gave the pound its value, were almost gone. The country that had run the world's financial system for a century was quietly broke. In July 1944, while the war was still being fought, representatives of 44 nations gathered at a hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, a small town in the northeastern United States, to decide what the world's financial system would look like after the war ended. Britain sent its greatest economist, John Maynard Keynes. Keynes was a Cambridge University professor and official advisor to the British Treasury, the government department responsible for managing Britain's finances. He was widely considered the most influential economist alive, and his job at Bretton Woods was specific: to design a post-war financial system that would give every nation, including war-damaged ones, a fair chance to rebuild.
The United States sent Harry Dexter White, a senior official at the U.S. Treasury Department, America's equivalent to Britain's finance ministry. White had a different objective: to make sure that when the war ended, the United States emerged as the world's dominant financial power. He had the stronger hand. Keynes proposed a radical idea: a brand new international currency that didn't belong to any single country. He called it the Bankor. Think of it like creating a neutral referee for a football match. If one team also owns the ball, the whistle, and the scoreboard, the game is never fair. They can change the rules whenever they're losing. Keynes wanted a currency that belonged to everyone, so no single country could use money as a weapon against another. The United States said no. America had emerged from the war as the world's largest economy. It held more than 2/3 of the world's monetary gold. It had the leverage, and it used it. The agreement signed at Bretton Woods in July 1944 made the US dollar the anchor of the entire global financial system. Every other currency was now tied to the dollar at a fixed rate, and the dollar itself was tied to gold. Britain signed the agreement. It needed American financial support too badly to refuse. What Bretton Woods created, without stating it directly, was a hidden dependency. The British pound's stability now depended on American goodwill. As long as the United States held that goodwill, the pound could function. The moment America chose otherwise, Britain had a structural problem, one built into the financial architecture it had just agreed to sign. For a few years, this dependency stayed invisible. Britain still behaved like a great power. It had nuclear weapons. It held a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council, the most powerful decision-making body in international politics, established after the war to resolve disputes between nations. It still administered territories across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean.
Then came the event that made the hidden dependency visible. Egypt is a country in northeastern Africa, bordering the Mediterranean Sea to the north and the Red Sea to the east. Running through Egypt is the Suez Canal, an artificial waterway completed in 1869, cutting through 193 kilometers of Egyptian desert to connect the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. Without the canal, ships traveling between Europe and Asia must sail all the way around the southern tip of Africa, adding weeks and enormous cost to every journey. The canal carries roughly a third of all European oil imports. Whoever controls it controls a critical artery of the global economy. For decades, the canal had been operated by a private company owned primarily by British and French investors. Britain had troops stationed along it. It was, in practice, treated as a British asset on Egyptian soil.
In 1952, Egypt's government was overthrown by a group of military officers. One of them, a 34-year-old colonel named Gamal Abdel Nasser, gradually emerged as the dominant figure, and by 1954, he was Egypt's effective leader. Nasser's central political goal was Egyptian independence, not just political independence from foreign governments, but economic independence from foreign ownership of Egyptian land and infrastructure. In July 1956, Nasser announced the nationalization of the Suez Canal. That means he declared it the legal property of Egypt, no longer of the foreign corporation. "This canal belongs to Egypt," he announced publicly. "We built it, we will run it ourselves." Britain's head of government at the time was Prime Minister Anthony Eden, a career diplomat who had spent 30 decades working in British foreign policy and had come to power only the year before, in 1955. In this story, Eden is the man who had to decide how Britain would respond to Nasser's announcement. His decision and the reason he made it would expose everything that Bretton Woods had hidden. Eden saw Nasser's nationalization as an existential challenge, not a trade dispute. His reasoning had three parts. First, the canal was the physical route through which European oil flowed. Losing control of it meant losing leverage over Europe's energy supply. Second, if Nasser succeeded without consequence, it would signal to every other government in the region that British assets could be seized without cost. Third, Eden had come of age watching the European democracies fail to stop Adolf Hitler in the 1930s by offering concession after concession, a policy known as appeasement, and he was determined not to repeat what he saw as the defining failure of his generation. He privately compared Nasser to Hitler in his own correspondence.
The United States and other nations urged negotiation, but Eden had already concluded that any outcome leaving Nasser in control of the canal was unacceptable. What Eden wanted was clear: retake the canal, demonstrate that Britain could still project military force across the globe, and if possible, remove Nasser from power entirely. Britain, France, and Israel coordinated a secret military plan. Israel would attack Egypt from the east. Britain and France would then publicly call for both sides to withdraw from the canal zone, and when Egypt refused, they would occupy it themselves under the cover of protecting shipping. The operation began in late October 1956. Port Said, a major city at the northern entrance of the canal, fell quickly once British and French troops landed.
The military campaign was succeeding. Then, Washington intervened. The United States, under President Dwight Eisenhower, a former general who had commanded Allied forces in Europe during World War II and was now serving as America's president, was furious. The Cold War, the global political and military struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union that dominated the second half of the 20th century, meant America needed the Arab world on its side, not driven toward Moscow by a European military invasion. Eisenhower sent a message to London. Imagine you owe a debt to a friend, and that same friend is holding a large stack of your trading cards. If they decide to throw all the cards onto the market at once, the price collapses. Your cards lose most of their value instantly. You can't stop them. The threat alone is enough to end the game. That was what America now held over Britain. The United States had accumulated large quantities of British pounds through years of wartime trade and lending. The threat was precise. If Britain did not immediately halt the invasion, America would sell its sterling holdings on the international currency markets.
Here is why that threat was not a bluff. It was mathematics. The pound was tied to the dollar at a fixed exchange rate as required by the Bretton Woods Agreement. To maintain that fixed rate when markets put pressure on it, Britain needed reserves, pools of gold and foreign currency large enough to buy back any pounds being sold. When pounds flooded the market, Britain had to purchase them back to prevent the price from falling. No purchases meant no defense of the rate. No defense of the rate meant devaluation. The war had consumed those reserves. Britain's gold and dollar holdings were critically low. Harold Macmillan, the minister responsible for managing Britain's national finances, a position called the Chancellor of the Exchequer, reviewed the numbers and reached a stark conclusion. Britain could not survive a coordinated American sell-off of sterling. There was not enough in reserve to absorb the volume of pounds Washington could release. The choice was binary: the military campaign or the currency. Britain could not defend both at the same time.
This moment has been reconstructed in precise detail by historian Diane Kunz, a scholar at Yale University who specialized in the economic history of the post-war period, in her 1991 study, The Economic Diplomacy of the Suez Crisis, published by the University of North Carolina Press. Kunz analyzed classified British Treasury documents after they were declassified and confirmed what the cabinet minutes showed. No financial mechanism existed to protect the pound against a determined American sell-off. The invasion was halted. Britain withdrew from Egypt within a week of the financial threat. Suez did not end sterling's reserve currency status in a single day, but it proved, in records that are now public, that Britain's financial independence had already ended years earlier, at a hotel in New Hampshire in 1944. The economist Robert Triffin, a Belgian-American professor at Yale University, who had spent years analyzing how reserve currencies behave over time, had already identified why this outcome was structurally built into the system. In 1960, he testified before the United States Congress with an observation so precise it became known as the Triffin Dilemma.
Think of a small town where one shop owner has the exclusive right to print money. Everyone in town needs that money to buy things, so the shop owner keeps printing more and more to supply the local economy. But the more money he prints, the less each bill is worth. Eventually, the bills lose credibility, and the shop owner loses control of the town's economy entirely. Triffin's insight was that the same trap is built into every reserve currency system. The country that issues the world's reserve currency must run deficits to supply enough currency to the world, but those same deficits gradually destroy the currency's credibility,
There is no way out from inside the system. Susan Strange, an economist and professor at the London School of Economics, Britain's most prestigious social science university, showed exactly how this trap had already closed around sterling. In her 1971 book, Sterling and British Policy, published by Oxford University Press, Strange documented what she called the sterling balances, the enormous quantities of British pounds held by other countries as their official reserves. The more countries held sterling, the more vulnerable Britain became. Any crisis, any moment of doubt could trigger a mass sell-off that Britain's own reserves could not absorb.
In November 1967, the devaluation arrived. The British pound lost 14% of its value overnight. Prime Minister Harold Wilson, who had replaced Eden in the years since Suez, appeared on national television to address the British public. "The pound in your pocket," he told them, "has not been devalued." Technically, the number on the bill hadn't changed. A pound still said £1, but everything priced in dollars, oil, metals, imported food, manufactured goods now cost 14% more. The number in your wallet was the same. What it could actually buy was not. 9 years later, in September 1976, the process reached its conclusion. The Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Denis Healey, the minister responsible for national finances, boarded a plane at Heathrow Airport in London, bound for an international finance ministers' meeting. He turned back before takeoff. The pound was in free fall. The reserves were exhausted. There was nothing left to defend it with. The International Monetary Fund, the institution created at Bretton Woods in 1944 specifically to provide emergency financial support to countries in crisis, lent Britain $3.9 billion. It was the largest loan in the IMF's history at that time.
Britain didn't collapse. The pound didn't disappear. But the institutional confidence that had made sterling the world's reserve currency, the trust accumulated across 2 centuries, was gone. It had not been destroyed in a single moment. It had transferred, mechanism by mechanism, across 32 years, from the hotel in Bretton Woods in 1944 to the airport in London in 1976.
Now here is the part that concerns your money. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency at exactly the moment Britain lost it, 1944. It has held that position for over 80 years. And the structural contradiction that destroyed sterling, the Triffin Dilemma, the accumulated foreign holdings, the dependency of other nations on American goodwill, is built into the dollar's design just as it was built into the pound's. The U.S. national debt has crossed $36 trillion. Foreign governments hold trillions more in U.S. Treasury bonds, the same kind of external holdings that gave Washington the power to stop Britain at Suez. The mechanism is not historical, it is active. History doesn't announce what comes next, it issues receipts. The receipt from 1944 to 1976 is written and available to read. Britain didn't see it clearly until it was already done. In November 1956, Britain launched a military invasion of Egypt. It had the ships, it had the soldiers, it had the air power.